Level 1-5 Instruments of Destruction. As a direct result of the quiet riot, the then newly appointed Captain Sharpton created a special peacekeeping task force which he dubbed the IOD. The IOD's duties was to carry out interrogations of order and discipline, but the truth of their duties was more in line with the nickname the fiends of Ogre Dungeon had given them, the Instruments of Destruction. Essentially, the IOD's mission was to beat the living piss out of any and all troublemakers. They were the Goon Squad, and Nolan was head goon. Under his command was Turnkey Smitty, no relation to Evil Dwarf King Smitty, Chuckles, Zao, Murder, and DeSardo. Smitty had survived every disaster and clusterfuck the dungeon had ever thrown at him. Oldest of the bunch, you will nary find an elf with a chest more puffed out farther, or a strut that seems to represent with every single step, "I'm the baddest elf who ever lived." Chuckles was short, dwarf short, but he overcompensated for this very well by knowing every single rule and regulation in the OG guidebook, and the entire layout of Ogre Dungeon like the back of his hand. And, should you ever have any doubts of this, well, don't worry, because Chuckles will remind you twice a day, "I know this whole damn place like the back of my hand." He also loved kidney punches and considered himself to be a master of the self-proclaimed telling fiends the time of day, vis-a-vis giving the tough guy speech to new admissions. "This is my house, you understand? You act like an elf and I will treat you like an elf. But if you stick one toe out of line, I'll punch you right in the kidneys." Zao was by far the biggest and the strongest of them, and the only member of the IOD Nolan considered to be half sane. Zao was an ogre, and though Autumn was in fact an elf kingdom, every day in Autumn you saw a dwarf running a taxi carriage, or the occasional moblin running a candy store. Though, that said, there was something terribly ironic about an ogre working inside a place called Ogre Dungeon. But none of it seemed to bother Zao, just so long as you kept any opinions you had about ogres to yourself. Zao was proud to be green, and if you had a problem with green, it was best to shut your face. Zao's hobbies included cake tossing, ox wrestling, chicken raising, and something he had dubbed extreme gardening. "My roses are extreme!" Then there was Murder. Dear Fonda, Nolan hated Murder, and for no reason that he could think of other than the fact that his first name was Murder. There was no way in hell any elf under the stars was named that name, but never, not to anyone, had Murder ever given anyone a different name since he became a turnkey. The epic prick even managed to give himself a last name, like Murder thought he was a noble or something. "Hey Murder, what's your second name?" "Mystery." DeSardo. DeSardo was the second strongest behind Zao, and though he was not an ogre, his muscles had muscles. He followed orders well, and he broke bones on command. That was the good news. Bad news was DeSardo was also the biggest crybaby, inside or outside of Ogre Dungeon, and if he wasn't beating ass, you could bet your fern he'd be whining his ass off, sun up to sundown, about how much he hated Ogre Dungeon, how much he hated imps, or dwarves, or orcs, or whoever was pissing him off that day. "I hate them! They stink!" Every member of the IOD knew in detail how little DeSardo got paid, or how little his wife had been sexing him. "Hasn't sexed me in a week!" So, the only thing to do with DeSardo was to make sure he always had plenty of ass to beat, just so you wouldn't have to listen to him. These were the elves and ogre, that kept Ogre Dungeon safe. These were Ogre Dungeon's cream of the crop. Nolan rolled his eyes up to the heavens and asked, "How am I not dead?" He turned to the IOD and said, "Line up." Line up wasn't exactly in order. It was just a lot shorter to say line up instead of pre-shift briefing. "Any unusual incidents?" Nolan asked, trying to keep a standing balance, trying not to wobble back and forth too much. "Nothing major, Sarge," Chuckles said. I caught an imp red-handed today trying to cut in line during the morning chow run. He was interrogated, then disciplined. I witnessed a manling speaking to a turnkey without being spoken to, DeSardo said. He was interrogated, then extremely disciplined, he said, punching his fists together. I had a morning fight with my wife today, Murder said, so I punched an ogre in the face because I can't punch my wife in the face. What? Nolan asked. I mean, he was interrogated, then disciplined. In the face, sir. And everyone except Nolan started laughing. So, Sarge, Smitty asked, both smiling and scowling at the same time. When Garland McMillan gets here, who gets to run the welcome wagon over him? Not you, Nolan said. Not after what you pulled, Smitty. As far as I'm concerned, you're still off welcome wagon duty. Smitty scowled. His face still looked puffy from the beating Nolan had given him. About 8 days ago, Smitty had somehow discovered the greatest escape attempt in all of Ogre Dungeon's history. An ogre named Shaw had spent the last 7 years digging a tunnel from his cell in Laboratory Row almost all the way to the lifts below Turntable. A few more months, and he would have gotten closer than any fiend since our Lars. But Smitty found him first, and Smitty thought the right thing to do was to hang him up in his cell with his own bed sheet, murder him, and tell everyone it was a suicide. Luckily, Nolan had caught him in the act. Horrified, as Nolan had never been before, he beat Smitty stupid without a single other thought in his head save, You want to bring all of King's office down on us, you moron? Smitty had crossed a serious line. Nolan had not ordered Smitty to do such a thing. Nolan would never order for such a thing. Such a thing would have put all of Ogre Dungeon under the magnifying glass of King's office. And though by stopping Smitty, Nolan had yet again saved Ogre Dungeon, that would never change the fact that he had beaten up a turnkey to save a fiend's life. Had Nolan gone soft? That was the question buzzing around every mind of every single turnkey in Ogre Dungeon. It didn't matter how many lives Nolan may have saved. Softness would never be tolerated. Not in Ogre Dungeon, not even from him. And even now, as he tongue-lashed Smitty, he could hear the questions on everyone's minds. Soft, soft, always so soft. Get out of my head, Nolan said to himself, and Smitty raised an eyebrow and asked, What was that, Sarge? Shut up! Then there was silence. Nolan tried to change the subject. Before we head on down, I want any of you living around Jova to be careful. I think the constables are up to something. I think they have it out for turnkeys now. Oh, screw them, Sarge, DeSardo said. No good bunch of lazy slackers, always getting their black and whites in the papers while we clean up their mess, while we get dumped on. Yeah, come on, Nolan, Murder said. What are they gonna do? Throw us in the dungeon? We got all the keys. And everyone snickered and jangled their dungeon keys. You're pathetic, Nolan. You're all pathetic. Shut up. Nolan screamed at the sky, and everyone, even Smitty, started to glance at him. Sarge, I'm sorry if I spoke out of turn, Murder said, rolling his eyes, looking at Nolan like he was a crazy person. Wake up, Nolan, he thought, just wake up. Look, just be on your guard, damn it. Whatever they're planning, Who cares what they're planning, Nolan? Said Smitty. There are 114 turnkeys and only 12 constables. We could run this town if we wanted to. We should run this town I'll run you into the ground, Smitty. Get out of here! All of you! We're adjourned, IOD. Get to your post. Stay the hell out of my way until I call you. Nolan, are you get to your post, Zhao? Why did it have to be Zhao? Nolan thought. I am ordering all of you to your posts. You need me to make it a direct order? Nolan took out his boken. The sight of it made them all quiver. Everyone dispersed into Turntable to catch a lift, but Smitty and Murder grinned ear to ear, slapping hands together as they disappeared from view. Nolan's head continued to burn, and he swore he could taste fresh mud on his lips, and he felt fingers wrapped around his neck like a vice. How do you like the taste of it, you little bastard? Nolan frantically fell all over his face. He felt all over his face. The scar was still there. He wasn't 8 years old. Nothing he was feeling was real. None of it's real, he said, and yet he still tasted the dirt on his lips. Bastard. Nolan wanted to scream, but he settled for dropping to his knees to throw up his morning breakfast. Torres, no, please, no. That blade was so hot when it went across his face. It felt like someone had dipped it in a pit of fire. Torres, Nolan screamed. Torres. And he knew who exactly he had to see. He had to go see Torres. Torres was the orc who gave him his scar.